the desert was never silent for long. The wind carried its own restless voice, shifting the dunes in sighs that whispered of ancient battles and bones buried beneath the sand. Overhead, the sun burned mercilessly, bleaching the sky to a pale and unforgiving blue. For Captain Elena Hawk Ramirez, the desert had become a graveyard of promises and steel. 3 weeks earlier, her Apache gunship had gone down during a night operation across the hostile border. The reports filed back home were swift and clinical: aircraft destroyed, pilot unconfirmed, presumed dead. In the records of her unit, her name slid silently into the grim category of MIA. To her comrades, it was another cruel loss in a war that consumed too many. To her family, it was a wound that left no closure. But for Elena, who had clawed her way out of the wreckage, bruised and bloodied, survival was not an option, it was instinct. The desert had not killed her. The fire of the crash had not claimed her. And though she was cut off from command, deep in enemy terrain and haunted by pain and thirst, she had a soldier's vow burning in her veins: she would return. The crash itself played again and again in her mind, a stuttering reel she could not pause. The mission had been simple on paper: a reconnaissance sweep with orders to support ground units pinned down near a canyon pass. The intelligence brief had claimed minimal anti-air threat, but the desert had a way of hiding teeth. One moment the night sky had been alive with stars, the thrum of rotor blades steady as a heartbeat, and the next it had erupted with tracer fire streaking upward like angry comets. The Apache had bucked under her hands, alarms screaming as systems lit up in frantic warning. She remembered the voice of her gunner, Sergeant Cole, a calm Midwestern drawl even as chaos erupted. "We're hit, Hawk, losing hydraulics." The ground had rushed up too fast. She fought the machine not to save it but to soften the fall, to buy them a sliver of chance. Then the world had turned to fire and sand. When she crawled free, lungs burning, she had screamed Cole's name into the smoke until her voice broke. No answer came. By dawn, the wreck was a blackened carcass half buried in sand, and the desert claimed it as another relic of war. 4 days after, Elena moved like a shadow across the wasteland, careful to stay unseen. She scavenged from the wreck, carrying a battered sidearm, a knife and 2 canteens of water. She stitched a gash along her arm with trembling hands and sheer stubbornness, cursing softly through clenched teeth. She learned to hide by day and move by night, following the stars like the ancients once did. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but worse was the silence, the oppressive weight of being alone where no one knew she still drew breath. She thought often of her unit, of the tight brotherhood forged through years of deployments. They believed she was gone, and that thought both cut her deeply and steeled her resolve. She would not be a ghost in their memories. She would not be another folded flag handed to grieving parents. She would find a way back or she would die clawing toward it. On the 5th night, she stumbled upon a caravan trail, faint tire tracks etched into the sand. She crouched low, pressing her palm against the grooves, and felt the tremor of possibility. If there were convoys, there were outposts. If there were outposts, there might be radio equipment. But risk hung over every step. Patrols scoured these lands, men armed and merciless, quick to drag captives into the black markets of war. She had seen the fate of prisoners before. Her heart hammered with a soldier's calculus: move fast and risk exposure, or move slow and risk starvation. She chose the first. Her boots left barely a trace as she followed the trail, keeping low beneath ridges and the thin cover of broken stone. Each mile pressed her body harder, but her mind sharpened, narrowing to a single iron point: survival. Nights blurred into one another. Sometimes she dreamed of the Apache still flying, her hands steady on the controls, Cole alive in the seat beside her, the desert shrinking below as they carved through the sky. But she always woke to sand in her mouth and the cruel ache of thirst. She rationed water to the last drop, whispering promises to herself: just one more night, one more ridge, one more chance. Her lips cracked, her uniform stiff with dried sweat and blood, but her spirit did not bend. She was not ready to be erased. The war had taken much from her, but it would not take her name from the living. Then on the 9th day she saw it. A glint on the horizon, faint but undeniable, the curved silhouette of rusted watchtowers against the dawn. An enemy outpost. Her breath caught, a mixture of dread and exhilaration. It was dangerous, a hornet's nest bristling with rifles and radios. But to her it was also hope. She crouched in the sand, heart pounding, and studied it through narrowed eyes. The sun rose behind her, painting the horizon in fire. She touched the patch on her sleeve, tattered and stained, the emblem of her unit still visible. "I'm not finished," she whispered, the words carried off by the wind. Somewhere beyond this desert, her brothers and sisters in arms still fought. Somewhere her name was carved into a list of the missing. She intended to change that. Elena lay prone in the sand, the enemy outpost etched against the horizon like a scar across the desert. It wasn't large, maybe a dozen crude buildings huddled within a ring of chain-link fences and makeshift barricades, but size didn't matter. What mattered was the antenna stretching skyward from its center, a jagged spike of metal glinting in the sun. That antenna could mean a radio, and a radio meant the chance to send her voice across the void, to break the silence that had swallowed her. She studied the guard rotations through the heat shimmer, memorizing every step. 2 men patrolled the perimeter, slow and careless, their rifles slung loosely as if the desert had convinced them no danger could come crawling from its endless dunes. At the gate, a rusting truck sat idle, its hood propped open, while mechanics cursed at its stubborn engine. Beyond, she glimpsed storage crates stacked high, the kind that sometimes carried rations, water, or spare ammunition. Her throat burned at the thought of water, but she pushed the need aside. First came the radio. Without it she was still a ghost. Without it she was still missing. She spent the day concealed within a cluster of rocks, watching the outpost breathe. The men laughed, smoked, argued, signs of complacency. She recognized the dialect when their voices carried across the still air, and her gut tightened. These weren't just militia, they were the same faction responsible for downing her Apache. She could almost hear the thunder of the anti-air guns again, the memory stitched into her bones. Rage flickered inside her, hot and sharp, but she forced it down. Rage was a luxury she couldn't afford. Discipline was her weapon now. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the sands, she prepared. She stripped away anything that clinked or glinted, wrapping fabric around her boots to muffle their crunch against gravel. She checked her pistol, 3 magazines left, and slid the knife into her belt. The desert sky darkened to velvet, the stars returning to their ancient watch, and Elena moved. Approaching the outpost was like stalking prey. Every sense sharpened, tuned to the rhythm of footsteps, the faint creak of metal. On the fence, the shift of rifles against shoulders. She circled wide, aiming for a section of the fence near the storage crates. The wire sagged there, weakened by rust and neglect, and the patrols were lazier near the rear. She belly crawled across the sand, the grit biting her skin until she reached the fence. Her knife slid silently across the links, carving a gap just wide enough to slip through. She paused, listening. Nothing but the murmur of guards half asleep at their posts. Sliding inside, she crouched low, her body tight with adrenaline. Each breath felt like a flare against the silence. The storage crates loomed close, stacked in crooked towers that offered both cover and shadows. She pressed her back against the cool metal, moving between them as the patrol passed a few meters away. Their voices drifted, careless jokes about pay and women, and Elena's fingers itched to silence them. But she couldn't risk it yet. Every shot would echo. Every body discovered would raise alarms. Patience. She counted their footsteps until they vanished into the night. Then she slipped deeper into the compound, following the faint hum of a generator. Its vibration carried through the ground, guiding her toward the heart of the outpost. The antenna rose taller with each step, and soon she saw it, the radio shack, a squat building with a single light burning inside. A guard sat by the door, rifle across his lap, head lolling in fatigue. Elena crouched in the shadows, heartbeat steady. One man between her and salvation. She studied him, every detail, the way his helmet slid forward when he nodded, the slackness in his grip, the distance to reach him in silence. Her training whispered through her mind like a litany. Close distance fast. Strike where it counts. Silence before sound. She moved. Sand muffled her steps until she was upon him, knife flashing in a single precise arc. His gasp never left his throat. She eased him down gently, lowering his body against the wall, and wiped the blade against his sleeve. The door loomed ahead. She pushed it open, slow, deliberate, the hinges groaning faintly. Inside, the air smelled of dust and sweat, and the hum of equipment filled the room. The radio sat on a battered desk, its dials glowing faint green. Hope surged in her chest, almost overwhelming. She crossed quickly, hands trembling as she adjusted the frequency. Static roared in her ears, but beneath it, possibility. Her voice cracked when she first spoke, dry from days of silence. This is Captain Elena Ramirez, United States Army Air Cavalry, call sign Hawk Actual. I am alive. I repeat, I am alive. The radio hissed back nothing but static. She clenched her jaw, adjusted again. To any friendly units receiving, this is Captain Elena Ramirez, presumed missing in action. I am behind enemy lines requesting immediate extraction. Again the static. Panic pressed at her chest, but she shoved it aside, twisting the dials, sweeping across bands. And then, faint, fragile, a voice. Repeat, identify yourself. Over. Elena's knees buckled. She gripped the mic like a lifeline, forcing her voice steady. This is Ramirez. Hawk Actual. I'm alive. The reply came clearer this time, the tone urgent, disbelieving. Ramirez? We marked you, Kia. Say again, you're alive? Her throat tightened, but she steadied herself. Confirmed. I'm alive. My Apache went down, Cole didn't make it. I need extraction coordinates. The line buzzed, and then the voice returned, filled with something she hadn't heard in weeks. Hope. Copy that, Hawk. Hold position. We're coming for you. Tears pricked her eyes, but she swallowed them down. No time for weakness. She had broken the silence. She was no longer missing. But as she turned from the radio, a noise froze her blood. The slam of boots outside, shouts in the night, the metallic rattle of rifles being readied. They had found the guard she silenced. The outpost was waking. And Elena Ramirez was once again caught in the teeth of the desert wolf. The first shout cracked through the night like a gunshot, followed by a clatter of boots and the snap of rifle bolts chambering rounds. Elena froze inside the radio shack, every nerve lit like a wire. The fragile thread of hope she had just grasped now dangled over fire. She ducked low, sliding beneath the desk as the door banged open and two men stormed in, rifles sweeping the room. Their voices spat in the guttural tongue of the militia, sharp and suspicious. One jabbed at the empty chair by the radio, noticing it abandoned mid-broadcast. His partner grunted, eyes narrowing toward the darkened corners. Elena's fingers tightened around her pistol. She could almost feel the heat of their suspicion closing in like a fist. When the first soldier stepped closer to the desk, she acted. The pistol barked once, sharp and final, and the man crumpled. Before the second could raise his rifle, she surged upward, knife flashing in a vicious arc. The blade caught his throat clean, cutting his shout into a wet gurgle. He dropped hard, his rifle clattering against the floorboards. Silence followed, broken only by the static hiss of the radio and the pounding of her heart. There was no hiding now. The outpost was alive with alarm. She snatched up the fallen rifle, slinging it across her back, and bolted out the side window before more boots could swarm the shack. The desert air hit her like a furnace, carrying the shouts of men rallying to hunt the intruder. Spotlights flickered on, beams cutting through the night like swords. She sprinted low between storage crates, each breath rasping through parched lungs, each step a prayer against discovery. Bullets cracked against metal behind her, sparks leaping from the crates as the militia fired blindly into the shadows. She ducked, rolled, and pressed herself against cold steel, fighting to steady her breath. Her training screamed at her. Never stop moving, never let them pin you. She peered around the edge, counting silhouettes as they spread like wolves. 10, maybe more. Too many to fight head-on. She needed chaos, needed to turn their own outpost against them. Her eyes locked on the idling truck by the gate, the hood still propped, mechanics long gone in the scramble. The fuel cans stacked nearby gleamed under the searchlights. An idea sparked, fierce and desperate. She crawled low, weaving through the maze of crates until she reached the stack. Her fingers found a lighter in one of the mechanic's jackets left draped on a barrel. She smiled grimly. Sometimes the desert provided. She doused the cloth of her scarf in fuel, jammed it into the can's spout and lit it. Fire bloomed hungrily. With a grunt, she rolled the can toward the truck, shoving it with her boot. It tumbled forward, spilling flames in its wake. A second later, the world erupted. The truck went up in a thunderclap, fire tearing through its frame, the blast knocking men off their feet. Shouts turned to screams. Smoke curled thick, choking the night sky. Alarms wailed, confusion rippling through the ranks as some scrambled to fight the fire while others fired wildly into the darkness. Elena used the chaos like wings, darting between shadows, closing distance to the perimeter fence. But fate had teeth. A soldier spotted her silhouette against the fire's glow and raised his rifle. The shot cracked, searing past her ear. She spun, dropping to one knee, and returned fire with the stolen rifle. The man pitched backward, his weapon flying. But more were coming. Bullets chewed the sand around her, sparks spitting from metal. She ducked into the skeleton of a half-collapsed shed, breath ragged, the wood groaning above her. Her mind raced. Extraction was coming, but not yet. They had her coordinates, but no bird would reach her in time if she was cut down here. She had to survive the next hour, maybe two, until friendly eyes spotted the flare of her presence. That meant holding out. That meant fighting. She scanned the shed and found her salvation, an old RPG propped carelessly in the corner, a relic left by men too arrogant to think they'd need it. She slung it over her shoulder, grim satisfaction curling through her chest. Outside, the militia regrouped, barking orders, tightening their noose. Elena gritted her teeth, rose from cover, and let the rocket fly. The warhead streaked across the night, trailing fire before slamming into the guard tower. The explosion shattered the air, sending wood and bodies raining down. Men screamed in panic, scattering as debris rained. The spotlight died with the tower, darkness flooding the compound. For the first time, the night belonged to her again. She moved fast, weaving through smoke and ruin, her senses sharp, every breath tasting of ash. Her body ached with exhaustion, but adrenaline carried her like a tide. She scaled the fence at the rear, boots slipping on the wire, but she hauled herself over, landing hard on the sand beyond. For a moment she lay flat, gasping, the stars spinning above her. Then the desert whispered, "Move." She pushed to her feet and vanished into the dunes, leaving the outpost burning behind her. Shouts echoed, but they grew distant as she slipped deeper into the sea of night. Her limbs trembled, her throat raw, but her spirit blazed. She had survived the fire once more. Yet as she staggered into the darkness, one thought cut through the haze. The militia now knew she was alive. Her escape was no secret. They would hunt her harder, with everything they had, desperate to claim the prize of an American pilot risen from the dead. The desert was wide, but so were their eyes and guns. She had bought herself another night, but with dawn would come the chase. And the horizon, painted with fire, promised only greater trials ahead. The desert night stretched endless before her, its silence broken only by the distant crackle of flames and the scattered echo of shouts from the outpost she had left in ruin. Elena pressed forward, boots sinking into soft sand, lungs burning with each ragged breath. Every step felt like it carried the weight of two lives, her own, and the one she refused to give up for her brothers and sisters who still believed she was gone. The radio contact had been made, the spark of hope lit, but she knew it would take time before extraction could reach her. Hours, maybe more. And time was the one thing the militia would not give her. Already, she could hear the faint growl of engines carried on the night wind. They were coming, trucks fanning out like predators across the desert, searching for the phantom who had risen from the ashes. She tightened her grip on the stolen rifle, forcing her body into motion even as exhaustion gnawed at her. She had to move, had to stay ahead, had to vanish into the vastness of the dunes before they closed their jaws around her. She angled her path toward the broken spine of a canyon she had glimpsed earlier, its jagged cliffs rising like the ribs of some ancient beast. The desert offered no mercy, but rock and shadow could. The moon rode high above, painting silver across the sand, leaving her exposed in the open flats. She crouched low, darting between ridges, every crunch of sand beneath her boots sounding like thunder in her ears. Behind her, headlights pierced the night, search beams sweeping, engines roaring as trucks carved through the dunes. The militia wasted no time. They wanted her alive if possible, dead if not. To them, she was a trophy, proof of dominance against her country. To Elena, they were simply the enemy, and she was not ready to fall into their hands. The first truck drew closer, its engine snarling as it climbed the ridge behind her. She dove flat into the sand, heart hammering as the beams swept over her. The light passed, but the engine did not. The truck slowed, men shouting in their harsh tongue, rifles snapping into readiness. She rolled onto her stomach, lifted the stolen rifle, and exhaled. The shot cracked, a clean burst through the night. One of the soldiers dropped, the others shouting in alarm. She didn't wait, she squeezed off 3 more rounds, sparks erupting as bullets tore into the truck's grill. The engine coughed, sputtered, then belched smoke. The vehicle veered, tires grinding against sand before it rolled onto its side, flames spitting from the hood. Men tumbled out, scrambling, some firing wildly into the dark. Elena was already gone, slipping into the shadows of the canyon, her rifle hot against her palms. The canyon swallowed her, its walls towering high, the air cooler within its stone throat. She pressed herself against the rock, sucking in harsh breaths, her body trembling with fatigue. She had bought herself time, but the pursuit would not stop. The militia would fan out, send more trucks, more men. She needed a place to make a stand, somewhere to draw them in and bleed their numbers until rescue arrived. As she crept deeper into the canyon, her eyes caught on a cluster of boulders collapsed across a narrow choke point. It was perfect: cover, elevation, and a bottleneck that would funnel her pursuers straight into her sights. She climbed quickly, dragging herself onto the rocks, settling into the shadows. From here she could see the mouth of the canyon and the desert beyond, headlights already crawling across the sand, weaving like angry fireflies. She checked her ammunition, 2 magazines left for the rifle, her pistol nearly empty. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but enough to make them bleed. Enough to remind herself that she was still a soldier, not prey. Minutes stretched, each one a weight pressing heavier on her chest. She could hear the trucks before she saw them, engines growling, voices raised in the hunt. Then they came, 2 trucks packed with men, headlights slicing into the canyon. They slowed at the choke point, cautious, rifles raised. Elena waited, breath steady, finger poised. The first man stepped forward, squinting into the dark. She squeezed the trigger. He dropped and chaos erupted. Shouts, gunfire, the sharp ping of bullets sparking against rock. She ducked low, returning fire in controlled bursts, each shot precise. Men fell, the canyon amplifying every crack and scream. They scrambled for cover, firing blindly, their bullets chipping stone around her. Dust filled the air, stinging her eyes, but she did not waver. She had learned long ago that fear was a shadow that only lived if you fed it. Tonight she starved it. Grenades arced into the canyon, their clatter sharp against stone. Elena rolled back, bracing herself as explosions tore through the choke point, dust and fire consuming the air. She coughed, ears ringing, body aching, but she rose again, firing into the smoke. Another truck screeched to a halt at the canyon mouth, reinforcements pouring out. Her position was crumbling, their numbers overwhelming. She gritted her teeth, forcing her battered body to move. She scrambled higher along the rocks, bullets snapping past, sparks cascading. She pressed against the stone, chest heaving, eyes wild with determination. This was more than survival now, it was defiance. She had been marked missing, presumed dead. But here she was, fighting in the dark, her Apache gone but her spirit unbroken. She was not a ghost. She was fire. And though the militia closed in like wolves, she knew rescue was on its way. All she had to do was hold. All she had to do was burn brighter than the night. The canyon echoed with fury. Gunfire rattled against the stone walls, ricocheting in deafening bursts that made it feel as if the desert itself were raging against her. Elena crouched behind the boulder, sweat stinging her eyes, ears ringing from the last explosion. Dust swirled thick in the air, choking, clinging to her skin, yet she forced herself to remain still. The militia was advancing cautiously now, no longer charging blindly. Their voices carried through the canyon, low and guttural, communicating hand signals and flanking maneuvers. They had realized she was not some panicked fugitive, they were hunting a soldier who fought like a cornered wolf. Elena reloaded with mechanical precision, sliding her last full magazine into the rifle, the metallic click echoing like a heartbeat. She counted in her mind, 15 rounds, maybe a few more in the pistol. Not nearly enough. But numbers had never guaranteed victory. Skill, timing, and willpower, that was where soldiers lived or died. The first silhouette appeared through the haze, moving low and steady, rifle raised. Elena steadied her breath, sights aligned and squeezed. The shot cracked and the man dropped without a sound. But more were already moving in, rifles flaring as they pinned her position. Bullets chewed the stone around her, sending shards slicing across her arm. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the sting of fresh blood, and shifted higher along the rocks. Her training carried her like instinct. Fire, move, fire again. Never let them fix you in place. She popped out from a new angle, unleashing 3 controlled shots. 2 hit home, 1 whizzed wide, but the militia ducked, startled. She scrambled back, lungs heaving as grenades clattered near her perch. She hurled herself behind another boulder as the blasts ripped the air, fire and dust shaking the canyon floor. Her ears rang, but she forced herself up again. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind refused surrender. She was alive, and as long as she drew breath, they would pay for every step. The trucks at the canyon mouth had gone silent. That silence chilled her more than the gunfire. It meant they were planning, waiting, tightening the noose. Through the dust, she glimpsed a figure climbing the opposite wall, flanking from above. She swung her rifle, but before she could fire, another soldier opened up from below, pinning her with suppressive fire. She flattened against the rock, heart hammering, trapped in a deadly crossfire. Adrenaline surged like lightning. She rolled hard, dropping low and sprinting across open stone as bullets sparked at her heels. She dove behind another outcropping, teeth clenched, body screaming with exertion. The flanker above shouted, a guttural bark of triumph, but Elena reacted faster. She drew her pistol, aimed up through the gloom and squeezed twice. The man's body crumpled, tumbling down the canyon wall with a sickening thud. She didn't stop to watch. Survival didn't leave room for satisfaction. Her radio, still clipped to her vest, crackled suddenly with static. Her heart leapt. Then a voice, faint but urgent, "Hawk Actual, this is Falcon 2. We read your signal. Sit rep, over." Relief nearly broke her knees. She pressed the button, voice hoarse but steady. "This is Hawk. I am pinned in Canyon Grid 7-4. Enemy militia. Numbers heavy, armed with trucks and rifles. I am low on ammo. Extraction needed now." Static roared back, followed by clipped words, "Copy, Hawk. Hold your ground. ETA 20 mics. Do you copy?" 20 minutes. It might as well have been 20 hours. Elena glanced toward the canyon mouth, where headlights still glowed faintly. 20 minutes against a horde. She drew in a steadying breath, her mind sharpening to a razor's edge. She had done more with less. She could last 20. The militia pressed again, pouring into the canyon in a surge of bodies and fire. Elena shifted higher into the rocks, taking advantage of the elevation. Her rifle barked, precise and merciless, each shot forcing them to slow, to duck, to hesitate. She wove her shots with movement, always changing angles, turning the canyon into her hunting ground. For a moment she felt the ghost of her Apache in her veins, the same rhythm of combat, the same deadly dance of fire and steel. She was no longer just surviving. She was fighting. And though every bullet spent was one closer to silence, she made each one count. Men fell. Trucks burned. The canyon floor became a graveyard of their arrogance. But fatigue was a shadow that grew heavier with each passing minute. Her arms trembled as she reloaded, hands slick with blood and sweat. Her throat burned, lips cracked, eyes raw from smoke. Her last magazine dwindled fast, each shot leaving the rifle lighter, the chamber emptier. She ducked low, checked her pistol. 5 rounds? That was all. The militia knew it too. They pressed harder, voices rising in a chorus of fury. Grenades thudded against stone, forcing her to scramble higher still, clinging to jagged rock as dust cascaded around her. One blast knocked her flat, ears ringing, vision spinning. She groaned, forcing herself to crawl upright, rifle dangling uselessly empty. Her pistol felt heavy in her hand, but it was all she had. She raised it, steady despite the tremors racking her body. If this was her last stand, she would meet it standing. Then the night split open with a sound she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat, the distant thrum of rotor blades. Low, steady, growing louder. Her chest heaved, eyes lifting to the horizon. Against the stars, a silhouette approached, sleek, familiar, a bird of prey cutting through the darkness. An American Black Hawk, its nose lights piercing the desert night. Relief crashed through her, fierce and overwhelming, but the fight wasn't over. The militia erupted in panic, some firing skyward, others retreating. Elena's lips curled into a grim smile. She raised her pistol and fired the last of her rounds, each shot a defiance, each one a signal to the friends who had not forgotten her. She would hold until they came. She would not die in silence. She would not remain missing. The desert stretched beneath Captain Elena Ramirez like a vast ocean of dust and fire. Her Apache thundered low over the horizon, kicking up trails of sand that whipped against the windows of distant farmhouses and scattered wild herds of goats. Every muscle in her body was taut with focus, her hands firm on the cyclic and collective, her mind replaying the coordinates that command had transmitted. Somewhere ahead, she knew, waited the truth of her disappearance, the reason she had been marked MIA. The radio hissed with static, and then came the voice she had begun to recognize like her own heartbeat, Major Coles. "Eagle 1, you're coming in hot. Our drones have you on visual. You sure about pushing through alone?" Her lips curved into the faintest, tired smile. Alone, that word had defined her for months, stranded in hostile territory, fighting to survive. Yet now, with the Apache roaring beneath her, she felt anything but alone. The helicopter was an extension of her, the armor she'd forged in fire. "I didn't come back to hesitate, Major," she replied. "This bird and I, we're going to finish what they started." She pressed the Apache lower, almost skimming the desert floor, weaving between shallow canyons carved long ago by forgotten rivers. The enemy had grown bold since news of her disappearance spread. They believed her gone, erased from the board, her Apache a smoldering ruin. They would never expect the same machine to rise again like a blade of fire through the sky. As she cleared a ridge, the battlefield revealed itself in harsh lines of smoke and broken steel. Convoys smoldered on the roadside and armored vehicles advanced in disciplined columns, their cannons sweeping the horizon. A resistance unit, her people, civilians who had armed themselves with whatever scraps of weaponry they could scavenge, was cornered at the far edge of the valley. She could see their desperate gunfire sparkling against the armored hulls of advancing tanks. It was a losing fight unless she could tip the balance. Her jaw tightened. These were the same villagers who had hidden her, fed her scraps, patched her wounds when she had staggered to them out of the wastelands. She owed them everything. Now it was time to repay that debt with fire. Command, this is Eagle 1. Marking enemy armor at grid 72 by 19. Engaging. She unleashed the Apache's fury. Hellfire missiles streaked downward, their trails glowing like vengeful comets. The first tank erupted in an explosion that shook the valley, its turret flipping high into the air before crashing down in a rain of twisted steel. The resistance fighters cheered, their voices faint but carried by the comms chatter that command had patched in. Elena didn't pause. She rolled the Apache into a banking turn, rockets screaming from their pods, carving arcs of destruction across the enemy line. Armored vehicles burst apart one after another, their crews scattering, their discipline shattered. For the first time in months, she felt the pulse of victory, raw and unrelenting. But the enemy wasn't finished. From the northern ridge, anti-aircraft batteries pivoted toward her, their barrels tracking her movements. The desert sky lit with tracer fire as the cannons spat streams of molten lead. The Apache rattled under the impacts, alarms shrieking across the cockpit. Elena's breath came hard, but she didn't flinch. She pushed the Apache higher, spiraling, using the canyon walls as cover. Her hands flew over the controls, every instinct sharpened by the months she had spent surviving without backup, without promise of rescue. She had become something more than just a pilot, she was predator and survivor fused into one. The Apache roared out from behind a cliff face, and she hammered the gun trigger. The chain gun beneath her spat fury, cutting the anti-air crew down in storms of fire. A missile followed, erasing the battery in a thunderclap of flame. Static burst again across the radio, followed by Major Cole's voice. Jesus, Eagle 1, you're rewriting the rules of engagement out there. Command says reinforcements are 30 minutes out. Hold that line. She laughed bitterly under her breath. 30 minutes could stretch into eternity on a battlefield like this. But there was no hesitation in her heart. She had not survived, fought, and risen again to crumble now. The resistance fighters, emboldened by her onslaught, began pushing forward, their vehicles sweeping around the flanks of the remaining enemy armor. She caught sight of them raising makeshift banners, their courage blazing. Elena's chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in years, pride untainted by command, by politics. This was humanity at its rawest, refusing to be crushed. Yet even as the tide turned, she felt the storm brewing. Sensors lit with warning tones, heat signatures moving fast from the east. Reinforcements for the enemy. Attack helicopters, their rotors biting the sky, coming straight for her. Her hands tightened on the controls. She whispered to the machine as if it were a living thing. Looks like it's just you and me again. The Apache responded with a deep, resonant hum, blades slicing the air like a war drum. She banked hard, rising to meet the incoming threat head-on. The desert trembled under the duel of titans about to unfold. And in that moment, Elena Ramirez no longer felt like a pilot marked missing in action. She was a storm rising over the horizon, fire in her veins, destiny in her hands. The sky was about to burn. The dust storms of the desert had become her constant companion, swirling around her cockpit like restless spirits. Every mile eastward brought the landscape closer to the border, and every mile carried the weight of the men and women who had believed her gone. The Apache hummed beneath her hands, not as a machine, but as a beast of will and memory, carrying her toward the reckoning she knew waited beyond the horizon. Her body ached from days without proper rest, but her mind sharpened like the edge of a blade. She could not falter now. Her radio had picked up faint transmissions, encrypted chatter that confirmed her worst fear. A convoy of hostiles was moving toward the border as well, carrying stolen technology that could tilt the balance of future battles. It wasn't just her survival at stake anymore. The mission had returned, uninvited but undeniable. She had been a ghost once, marked missing, presumed gone, but now she would rise not just for herself but for the cause she had sworn to. The desert air carried that knowledge like fire through her veins. As night fell, she flew low, hugging the terrain, her Apache nearly skimming the dunes. The stars above were clear, infinite, yet cold. Somewhere beyond those stars her family must have wondered if her name would ever come home. She thought of her mother's last words before deployment, a soft whisper in a kitchen far from war. "Promise me you'll return whole." That promise had been broken by circumstance, torn apart by the fireball that had sent her spiraling into obscurity. But here, guiding her Apache through enemy territory, she forged a new promise. If she could not return whole, she would return unbroken in spirit. Hours into her flight, the horizon lit with movement. Headlights crawled across the earth like insects, too many for a simple patrol. The convoy stretched long, armored vehicles flanked by technicals bristling with mounted guns. They were prepared for pursuit, prepared for threats from the ground. What they were not prepared for was a ghost in the sky. She circled wide, the Apache systems whispering their deadly readiness. Hellfire missiles blinked green, chain gun primed with a low growl. Her hands hovered over the controls, not trembling but deliberate, calculating the cost. Each strike would paint her presence across the desert sky. But hesitation was a luxury she could not afford. She dipped the Apache low, stalking her prey like a hawk. The first missile screamed into the night, a line of fire cutting across the black canvas of the desert. It struck the lead vehicle in a blossom of flame, scattering the convoy into chaos. Shouts rose over radios, headlights swung wildly, and the neat march of steel fractured into panic. She struck again, the second missile punching through the center.